we're not really preparing students for the rigor of the competitive world that they are likely to live in.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. As we take a break from recording, we have chosen to replay several of our greatest hits for you to enjoy. We hope that you are able to gain insight for your educational journey. Well, Andrew, Happy New Year to you. So, do you have any resolutions for this year?
No. That would be too dangerous.
Well, do you mind if I make a couple suggestions?
Well, sure, boss.
Well, I will say that I listened to another podcast besides just this one. I know that doesn't surprise you completely. But one of the podcasts I listened to talks about the advantage of setting goals rather than resolutions. So I have a possible goal for you. You ready?
Okay, I'm girding up my mental loins to hear this now. Go ahead.
Okay, how about if you write 12 articles this year? How does that sound?
No.
What do you mean? You are a writing teacher.
No.
But okay, then if you're not willing to do that, then perhaps it's because you are a reluctant writer. And if that's the case, then I have this great audio talk for you to listen to.
Well, I don't know. People do say things to me that don't make sense, such as they'll come up to me at a conference or something and say, well, I just want my child to enjoy writing. And I'm thinking, what? I mean, I suppose some people enjoy, pumping weights or running a marathon or fasting for 40 days, but that's got to be the exception. And writing is kind of like that. I mean, let's face it, I don't really enjoy writing. In fact, I think there's been times when you had to come and babysit me, sit in my office and say, I'm not leaving until you finish writing this
Pretty much.
article. And I will say that to people. I'll say, I don't actually like writing. I would not do it in my spare time. It is something I have to force myself to do. And they're a little bit shocked, like, well, but you're the writing guy. I mean, why wouldn't you like it? There's a great quote. I think it was Mencken who said, writers are people for whom writing is more difficult than for other people.
Okay.
Why is that? Well, I guess if you consider yourself a writer, then there's a standard of quality or perfection.
The pressure's on.
That you are striving for, and other people may expect that. So when I say I don't like writing, that kind of shocks people. What I do like, and you've seen this, is having written something. I really enjoy having the finished product and being able to send it out and hope that it enlightens or blesses people, or at least amuse them, or at least not bore them.
Right.
And so that's an interesting kind of a paradox there. I don't enjoy the process. Why? Because it's hard work. You have to discipline yourself. You have to stay in one spot. You have to focus your thinking. You have to plan. You have to, phrase something and rephrase it. And it's not easy and it's not fun.
Right.
But it is very enjoyable to have finished something that you believe has some value in it. I think many children have the same experience. The process of doing it isn't something they will say, oh, good, I get to write something today. But when they have done it, they can be proud. They have that sense of accomplishment, especially if others appreciate what they wrote.
Right.
And so let's keep our understanding clear. You don't have to like writing to be decent at doing it.
Right.
You do, however, just have to have the discipline.
Exactly. When you said something about doing hard things, I think about a book that was titled exactly that.
Do hard
things. And I think of a quote that I said all the time to my boys as they were growing up, and that is, hard work is immensely satisfying. But when I hear you, I think, well, maybe the hard work in and of itself, is that immensely satisfying, or the product of what you've actually created?
Probably both. Probably, right. Both of those. It's always a case where we can do less than our best,
mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're children or adults, whether
mm-hmm.
we're in school or in a job or whatever, we can always get by
right.
doing something that's okay.
Right.
And yet we always have that sense of, well, I kind of just got by and there's nothing really to be proud of there.
Right. It reminds me of another quote that I would say with my boys, which is, good enough isn't. Right. Just do your best. And
right.
That's good enough.
Right. But on the other hand, we can't always do our best. We always we'll always fall short.
Right.
Or almost always.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that tension between getting by and doing our absolute best.
Mm-hmm.
And we're, I think, most of the time somewhere in between. And yet there are those peak moments, and we say, aha, this, I really did try hard. I did my best. I'm finished with it, and I can rest a little bit now. And so children are the same way.
Mm-hmm.
We can't expect them to always do their best. That's unreasonable expectation.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And yet we can encourage that. We can be excited for them when they feel excited about having done their best. And that's true whatever discipline, music, art, sports, and writing too.
Right. There's a couple of things that you've said that make me think of some of the talks that you've done. One is nature deficit disorder, and how today's day we love being in our comfortable beds, and that's soft and that's easy. But doing hard things can be enjoyable.
Well, the idea of a rigor is an ideal that we kind of have lost. In nature deficit disorder, I kind of paint that picture of, camping isn't comfortable.
No.
It's not comfortable and pleasant to lie on hard ground and fight cold weather or mosquitoes or try to get the fire started, have to catch your dinner and then cut open the fish but it's always interesting because people who go camping, whatever you eat on a camping trip, you'll say, this is the best food ever.
Mm-hmm. Why? Do you know why? They're hungry.
Because you're hungry. And you come back from the camping trip and you say, that was enriching.
Yes.
So it wasn't easy. It wasn't comfortable. There were unpleasant moments, but you're a better person for having done it. And I think that is where we, kind of as a culture, are really losing that sense of rigor. Teddy Roosevelt gave a great speech one time. It got nicknamed The Strenuous Life.
Okay.
Where he talked about the value of living the strenuous life, to do hard things. Or another book that I have on my shelf, Study is Hard Work. Right?
Right.
It's hard to learn something well, whether it's algebra for some, calculus for others, Latin for some people. It's not easy, but there's this deep level of satisfaction that comes from having mastered something. So I guess our question, and I have no easy answer, but our question as educators is, how do we nurture that? How do we work to promote the striving for excellence in an educational environment that kind of discounts that,
right,
in a social environment that values entertainment and relaxation a little bit more? The place where people talk about this, of course, is in the business world.
Right.
That's where you get people who read these books, what got you here won't get you there, or something that you need to be constantly improving. Otherwise, you won't have success in this rapidly capitalistic world that we live in.
Right.
And so that becomes a bit of a shock for some kids, too. They coast through a school with, self-esteem and grade inflation, and then they hit the university that now wants to be sure that they don't feel offended in any way.
Right.
And, they're in their safe space. And I've even talked to professors who say, it's very hard to give students bad grades. It's wrong now to do that.
Well, and students now have the opportunity at almost every class to evaluate their professor. And that's dangerous right there.
That's got its own inherent danger. And then what happens? They're actually suited for a communist economy, but they go into a capitalist economy, where it literally is you swim or sink. You do your best, or you are relegated to the edges.
Right.
And so we're not really preparing students for the rigor of the competitive world that they are likely to live in.
Right. And a piece of that, of course, is good communication skills.
Absolutely. A book that my friend Chris Perrin put me onto, it's called The Global Achievement Gap by, oddly, a professor at Harvard, Tony Wagner, I believe. He talks about what is needed for us as a country, as a culture, America, to remain competitive in the world, and what type of education is needed. And he got on this because, number one, his oldest child went to first grade, and he realized as a professor of education at Harvard and what his daughter was experiencing in first grade, there was a big gap philosophically there. The second thing is he was sitting on an airplane, I believe, talking to a very high-level manager of a very high-tech company, an international high-tech company, and said, what do you want? What kind of students do you want, or what kind of people do you want coming out of schools?
Right. Great question.
Because I'm in the forefront of leading education and educational philosophy and direction and think tank and all that. And he was very surprised that what the tech people wanted, and he redid this conversation many times, wasn't your STEM stuff.
Okay.
It wasn't high-tech training. What they wanted were some of the soft skills, such as, number one, communication, right? What he calls critical thinking or problem solving. We could have a whole podcast about critical thinking, and that is a buzzword and what it actually might mean, and collaboration and discipline and character. You can teach someone technical skills,
right?
But those formative skills are what make the difference.
Right.
So this book, Global Achievement Gap, is very interesting because he kind of lays this out. Here's what we need to be doing in education, and here's how we're not doing that.
Right.
And then here's a few situations, here's a few circumstances where we seem to be doing this. Schools that operate kind of like businesses in a way. Classical education, a lot of the soft skills are developed when you study grammar and logic and rhetoric as a preparation for mathematics, geometry, astronomy, music, and the quantitative arts. And individualized learning environments that we see with the trend toward differentiated education in schools, and of course what homeschooling and alternative schooling is all about.
Sure.
So the idea then is, how do we cultivate rigor that is appropriate to the needs of the world? And that's a big question. And I think we do that through a combination of setting up motivational systems.
Right, and we did a couple podcasts on motivation.
We've talked about that. We do it through environment. When you're working with people that are all excited about doing their best, what happens?
You want to do your best.
You want to do your best. So how do we create those environments in schools? I think all of us get inspired by the stories of great people. And so bringing back, if you would, into the curriculum, the stories, the biographies of great people as part of the standard fare that all children should have.
And every story has a conflict, which means they did hard things.
They did hard things, yes, and pushed through. And it's sad. You don't see many children's books now that are biographies. Whereas you talk to someone kind of older than us, like Webster, And they were always having to read the stories of great men and women in history and in their culture, and this is inspiring too.
Right. Hero, someone to look up to.
Yes. And it's interesting. I've thought a lot about the superhero craze. You know how we've in the last couple decades had this boom of big screen, high budget movies,
Marvel,
of
DC,
superheroes.
Yes.
Why? What is it that we crave that's being fulfilled by superheroes? And I think it's because we've actually become disconnected with our own heroes. I think comic books had to be born in America because Europe still had more of a tradition, even a Christian tradition of saints and great people. And we lost that. We have our own kind of great people, but then recently, what's happened? They've even kind of been slammed, right?
Yeah.
If you pick up the newest history book that is to prepare AP students for U.S. history, it's got just a few paragraphs about George Washington and the fact that he owned slaves, right? Was dominant. You get just a few paragraphs about Thomas Jefferson, and he owned slaves. You get a few paragraphs about Ronald Reagan, and he had the most expensive inaugural celebration of any president to date.
So all of our heroes are being tarnished.
Our heroes are being tarnished. Exactly. A very good way to phrase that. So then, who do children look up to? Since
Iron Man.
We don't have any real ones, we need to now enthrone the fictitious ones. But I'm not even sure this is good. Because you could aspire to be like a great person who actually lived. But you cannot aspire to have superpowers. So there's a disconnect there. And I don't know. It's something, maybe I should write an article about it. But I don't want to.
So that would be wonderful if you do. And it would be wonderful to have it finished. And it would be wonderful for everyone to read your great work. Okay, so I'm probably not going to count on getting that article from you.
Not anytime soon, no.
No. But can we go back to this book that you were referring to?
Oh, Tony Wagner, Global Achievement Gap.
Exactly.
Yeah. The thing that struck me, of course, was the emphasis on communication skills, because that's my business.
Yeah.
Why is that important? And I meet boys, I meet teenage boys out on the road or at conference, and they go, I don't really care about writing. I'm going to go in the army, or I'm going to be an engineer. Or, you meet people, or even parents who say, well, he's likely to go into science.
So he doesn't
math
even know
is
how to
his
write?
thing.
Wow. Yeah.
Right. Okay, I can accept that. We all have aptitudes.
Sure.
Certainly, some people have higher math aptitude than other people. And we all have different. Some have high artistic aptitude. Some have musical. Some have language. So yes, there is that range. But just because your aptitude is not the highest doesn't mean it's not valuable to develop those skills. In fact, I taught music for so long,
Right.
And violin, and I would often think about my students, and you'd have some that would take to it, and they would just, catch on and play well, and it was so easy to teach them and get good progress, and other students who would just take so much longer to kind of make that same level of progress,
Sure.
and not nearly as easy. And there is the tendency to think, well, you should take the easy to teach high aptitude kids because they'll become greater faster, and but I would always look at the kids who would struggle a bit and think, this is maybe doing more for them, struggling through this, mastering a hard section of the new piece.
Right.
This is maybe doing more for their brain and for their soul than those for whom it's very easy. I had a quote once, it was anonymous, I can't quote it directly, but it was something I used to share with kids. He who struggles is twice blessed because he not only learns what he's trying to learn, but he learns how to overcome the difficulty of it.
So true.
And so let's not give up on learning things just because we don't have the aptitude or because they're hard. But back to the communication, this is what I tell the boys. I say, well, I'm going to go do this or that. And see, what's fascinating about the way the world is, it almost doesn't matter what career you go into. You could go into, the military. You could be a stay-at-home mom. You could go into a scientific field. You could become a garbage collector, which I hear in some places pays quite well. It doesn't matter where you go. If you're good at what you do, you'll rise up to a certain level, but you'll cap out.
Yes.
Right? It's the people who are good at what they do and have the skills to communicate those ideas that rise up to the higher level.
Right.
So the good engineer becomes a good engineer, and he stays a good engineer because he's good at engineering. But it's the good engineer who can also communicate engineering ideas that will rise up and become, say, the vice president or a manager or a leader in that field.
Right.
So if what we're trying to accomplish here is growing leadership skills in our students, if that's one of our educational goals, we cannot neglect the communication skills, both written and oral. And that's one thing that, Dr. Webster firmly believed, that I see true again and again. And I see in the world, and I talk to people who say, these kids, they come into this job, they can't write, they don't articulate ideas, they don't even know what they're trying to write, they don't speak. Well, how do you work with people like that?
Right.
Even if you're in computer science or bioengineering, right?
Exactly.
You have to be able to articulate ideas clearly to make good progress in any field.
Right.
And I think that's what Tony Wagner was talking about a bit in the Global Achievement Gap. And I think we are therefore doing a great work for all students of all aptitude and preparing them with the vital skill for whatever field they become more specialized in.
I think of the spectrum of students who hate writing, students who tolerate writing, students who love writing. When they first encounter our approach to teaching writing, our goal, of course, is to move them along that spectrum. So although we can't always count on the kids loving writing, we can at least move them along the spectrum so that they can at least feel that sense of accomplishment that you talked about at the beginning.
One of my children was with me at a conference years ago, and I was away from the booth, and I was coming back, so I was kind of spying on her to see how she would interact with a customer. She's probably, 12 years old, kind of that age at which they become painfully honest about things. So this potential homeschool customer comes up and says, start talking to her. So, you're Mr. Pudu's daughter. Oh, have you done this? Yeah. So do you like writing? She goes, no. And the person kind of deflated, and she said, well, do you do it well? She goes, if I have to. I thought, child of my own heart right there.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. Well, it's been great having this conversation with you.
Yes, and no jokes this time. We'll have to make up for that next one.
Okay, sounds great.
All right.
Thanks so much for joining us for one of our favorite episodes. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher, or you can visit us each week at iew.com/podcast. New recordings will begin airing in January of 2020. Until then, we hope you'll join us each week as we revisit our greatest hits.